Welcome back to the Daily Dose of Philippians. I'm Pastor Ray. Now let's turn our attention to the book of Philippians.
Philippians chapter 2, verses 25 through 30. I have thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for you all, and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, near to death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. So receive him in the Lord with all joy, and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. So here, Paul is introducing someone named Epaphroditus, and he's talking about his faithfulness and his role in Paul's ministry and in the lives of the Philippian believers. And Paul has just told the Philippians that he wants to send Timothy to them when it is convenient. But here he says, I have thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, who is my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier. Now, you know that Paul has been, up to this point, calling the Philippians to unity and telling them to strive together, even using military type language. And so he's putting Epaphroditus up as an example of how to do this. And he calls Epaphroditus your messenger and minister to my need. For he has been longing for you. Now, Paul has already told the Philippians that he longs to see them, and he wants to be with them, wants to see them again. And so we've seen this idea of believers wanting to be in fellowship, wanting to be together. And I think in times, sort of like what we've been in recently, where we have not been able to meet together, that our fellowship becomes more desirous. We long to be with one another. And we need to cultivate that. We're not meant to just be together online. We're meant to be together in person. So we long for that time when we can be together. And Epaphroditus has been distressed for the Philippians because they heard that he was ill. Now, Paul's going to show us that he was very sick, this man Epaphroditus. But even in his moment of sickness, he's more concerned about the Philippians, that they would hear that he was sick and be distressed. He was distressed for them, that they would be grieved to hear that he was sick. Now, folks, that is sacrificial indeed. Now notice this. Indeed, he was ill, near to death. But God had mercy on him, and not only on him, but on me also, lest I should have sorrow upon sorrow. So Paul's saying that God spared Epaphroditus from death. Through this sickness, he healed him. And he says he didn't just have mercy on him, but he had mercy on me. He said, because if he had died, I would have had sorrow upon sorrow. There's a couple of ways that Paul would have had sorrow. Number one, Epaphroditus was a friend. But secondarily, Epaphroditus, we're going to see, is a minister serving Paul. And Paul was refreshed by him, and Paul was helped by him. And so Paul's very happy that the Lord allowed Epaphroditus to live on. So this sort of reminds us of the first chapter when Paul says I desire to go and be with Christ, but it's needful that I be here with you. And so Paul's seeing how it's needful for Epaphroditus to continue. And he says, I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, and that I may be less anxious. And so Paul's referring here to being anxious for the Philippian believers. Now notice he has said that he wants to hear a report from them to see how they're doing. And he's concerned about unity in the church and some problems in the church. And they no doubt bear on Paul's mind. If you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 28, Paul talks about all of the trials that he faces, and he mentions to them that he is under the weight of the daily care, or some render it anxiety, of the churches. And Paul has planted these churches and he cares for them, and he continually bears them in his heart and is concerned for them. So he says to receive Epaphroditus with all joy and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ. So those who give their all and suffer for Christ are certainly worthy of honor. And he risked his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. So in other words, what you haven't been able to do in person with me, he's been able to serve me and serve you even, and he has risked his life to do it. Now I want to mention just a couple of things here. Number one, sometimes you'll hear people talk about healing and things of that nature, and we most certainly know that God heals, and he healed Epaphroditus because he had mercy on him. But sometimes you'll hear people say, well, if you just have enough faith, God will always heal. And if you just trust God, he's going to heal. But notice here in this passage that Paul realizes that Epaphroditus very well could have died. And the only reason he didn't was because God had mercy on him. So here we see an example of a godly believer who had a deathly sickness. And so we should never take the position that, if you are living pleasing to God, and if you're a godly person, you'll never have trials, you'll never be sick. Well, that's simply not biblical. I think Epaphroditus would object to that. So we praise God for healing, but we also know that sometimes we do have sickness, sometimes we do suffer, and sometimes God even allows us to leave this world in those ways. But that doesn't make us less of a Christian. It doesn't make us less of a servant of Christ. But also, I want to point out something else really quick. Epaphroditus is being used as an example. Paul has already used himself as an example of unity and of how to be faithful. And then he's pointed to the humility of Christ to show how Christ esteemed others greater than himself. And then he just has mentioned Timothy as an example of someone who he says, I have no one else who will care for you like Timothy. And now he mentions Epaphroditus. Most scholars recognize that Paul right here is using 4 examples to show the Philippians what it looks like to serve together in humility and in unity. And Epaphroditus is the 4th of 4 examples of that.
Thanks for watching. Hope you were blessed by today's video. Give us a comment if you have a question. Share this with your friends, and I'll see you next time as we continue through the book of Philippians.